existence, embodied sentient existence, starts with unicellular consciousness. And in this schemata, I'm leaving out plants. If you want to include all your lifetimes as an oak tree and a piece of lichen and so on, that's fine. But I'm just going to kind of skip over those. I'm going to say embodied existence starts with unicellular consciousness. And what's interesting to me about that is that the human journey from a purely physical, anatomical and physiological point of view, you start out as unicellular consciousness, right? You've got the human egg cell, and then you've got the little sperms. And what's kind of interesting about the human egg cell, that you've got what is it, 100,000 of those in the ovaries. There's a big supply of them that are there right when a female is born. What's interesting about those cells is they're the largest human cell that exists. They're so large, and this is actually kind of crazy if you think about it, that they're actually visible to the naked eye. That visibility to the naked eye, I suspect, has an interesting and deep significance. I just don't quite know what it is, but it's interesting to me. In the same way that the human lifespan of, say, 84 years, if the sun had the same perceptual mechanisms as a human, proportionally speaking, one human lifespan would be like this moment of awareness for the sun, a brief flash of consciousness. The shortest period of time a human can perceive something for would be the equivalent of a human lifespan to the lifespan of the sun. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? It's a complete divergence from my topic, which is unicellular consciousness, but it's still interesting. So here's this cell. It's a great big cell. The human egg contains all that information about you. But we start out as unicellular, right? Just like those different funny little creatures that started out at the beginning of evolution. The beginning of evolution of life on this planet, as best as scientists can figure out, and who knows, right? Maybe it was actually aliens. But anyway, as far as we know from a scientific point of view, I think it was in like the Permian era or the Precambrian era or sometime like that, I don't know, some evolutionary phase. For 2 billion years, life on this planet was a bunch of little unicellular organisms floating around in the oceans. And actually, 2 billion years is a long time to be hanging out as a unicellular organism, but that's probably what we all did, right? And then you move on to like these next stages of sentient embodiment. But before we even go there, so as a human being, okay, you're where do you really come from? We don't know really where you come from. But the sperm penetrates the zona pellucida of the human egg during human fertilization, right? And there's this whole, there's actually this electrical phenomena that takes place. That's just been discovered, just like a few weeks ago. That when the sperm cell penetrates the zona pellucida of the egg, there's this amazing electrical phenomena that occurs, and you can actually see it as photoluminescent flashes of light. And I always saw that in my meditations on human what's it called? Fertilization. I always saw this electrical thing going on. So. And then there's the rearranging of the DNA and the sharing of the DNA of the father and the mother and so on. And then the human egg starts this journey, right? It's starting this journey down the fallopian tube, down into the ampulla of where the fallopian tube sort of comes off of the uterus, and it's this tiny little speck, which you can actually technically see, and it's floating in fluid, right? And it's on a journey that lasts for at least 7 or 8 days, generally, before it implants normally on the posterior wall of the uterus. Now, the experience of time for sentient embodied creatures varies according to the size of the creature. According to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Romantic poet, and according to Gurdjieff, the Russian mystic, and Uspensky, the Russian mystic, and other people who kind of tuned into this a little bit. The experience of time, when you're a little tiny, speck, you're a little zygote, right? You're now a fertilized egg, a zygote, and you're floating down, into the ocean of fluid that's inside the uterus. And my suggestion is that that takes a long time from a subjective point of view, from the point of view of the consciousness of the being that is now attaching to this egg. You're floating around for like hundreds of years compared to your time experience now. Things go pretty fast now. And so human beings actually innately experience unicellular consciousness. In other words, it's in your cellular memory. Right? It's in the memory of your body. What was this evolutionary stage of unicellular consciousness? Now, as far as I can tell, unicellular consciousness is associated with feeling really blissed out. Right? You're not experiencing attachments or aversions or desires, or it's like you're just blissed. The consciousness is attached to the physical, but it's in a state of bliss. So when consciousness is attached to the physical and it's in a state of bliss, that is the bliss of embodiment, which a lot of people spend a lot of time sitting cross-legged on their ass trying to get back to. And it's already innate in your body, because here you've got unicellular consciousness from that original zygote, right? Now what's happening inside that zygote as it floats down the fallopian tube is the cells inside the zygote are dividing like crazy. The zygote itself is so large you can actually almost see it with the human eye, and inside it, it's forming sister cells, blastomeres, that are dividing and redividing and redividing and redividing until you have maybe 64 of them sitting inside that zygote, right, which doesn't actually change shape per se. And those sister cells are all identical. You could take any one of them and you could recreate a new mini you. A little mini me could be cultured out of any of those. And that's why we're also excited about stem cells, right? Because maybe you could use those stem cells and get back to the place before you drank yourself into liver cancer and everything would be better. Who knows? Maybe that scientific promise will pan out, maybe not. But from the point of view of your evolving consciousness, which cell are you? You got 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 of them. They're all identical. They've all got all your genetic information, but they're like copies of each other. It's interesting, isn't it? Right? So the consciousness, of the unicellular consciousness, is not differentiated. There's no attachment, there's no aversion, there's no singular or plural. It's an interesting state of consciousness. And every single cell in your body derives from those cells, which are all like deriving from one cell. They're all identical, right? So the cell matrix of your body, the fundamental vibration of your entire body, is that state of embodied bliss. Now, adult humans often don't recognize that because of our 25% metabolic supply to our cranium. It makes us pretty confused sometimes. It can be a real detriment to just being normal. You know, somebody did this study where they interviewed people who tried to kill themselves by jumping from high places. And well, obviously, the ones they interviewed survived. So it was really hard to do the study where they interviewed the ones that died, but I'm sure with the right transmediums you could do it. But this was a study of people who leapt often from bridges into water in order to kill themselves, but actually survived. So what do you think people are thinking as they're flying through the air towards the surface of the water, where their imminent death awaits them?
Freedom.
Oh shit.
Yes. Oh shit. Edit language here. Oh damn, I messed up. But using the F word. Using some very emphatic word, right? The embodied wisdom, the wisdom of the actual cells of the body, does not want to end itself because of some nonsense going on in your brain. And so that's the embodied state of consciousness that vibrates inside people underneath all the other stuff. That's that first consciousness, that unicellular consciousness that we spent 2 billion years hanging out in. And then we were in it for some portion of time that's very difficult to define. Technically, from our point of view, it's a week. But from the subjective point of view of the consciousness attached to the zygote, probably a lot longer period of time. So my suggestion is that unicellular consciousness corresponds to the tailbone and to the sacrum. Now, anatomically, we know, and from a Chinese medical point of view, we know that working on points around the tailbone and the sacrum addresses issues of fertility and reproductive issues, and has a very, and just anatomically, we know that the nerve endings around the tailbone are very directly related to the nerve supply to the genitalia, as well as to the ovaries and the testicles and so on. So I'm going to suggest that the spine has different segments, different sections and different segments, and these relate to the different stages of evolutionarily embodied sentient existence, the first of which is unicellular consciousness.